Hey guys, Sam from Manfa's Makes. Welcome back. It is Sunday, which means more stories from Grimm's Complete Fairy Tales. As always, I am just reading the words from the page. I do not agree with anything written. I am not sharing my opinion on any of it. I am literally just reading you the stories as they were written so long ago. Thanks for coming back to all my returners, and hi to any newbies. If you are new here, I read these stories on a Saturday and a Sunday, and there is a whole playlist. Please do go check it out if you are new and see if it is something that tickles your fancy. So I have had a quick look ahead at the stories today because yesterday was a bit of a long one, and I do believe I should be able to fit in 3, possibly 4, so it might be a bumper edition today, guys, because they're all quite short. So let's get the storytelling started, shall we? So we're starting on story 38, which is the wedding of Mrs. Fox. And it says, first story. There was once an old fox with 9 tails who believed that his wife was not faithful to him and wished to test her. He stretched himself out under the bench, did not move a limb, and behaved as if he were stone dead. Mrs. Fox went up to her room, shut herself in, and her maid, Miss Cat, sat by the fire and did the cooking. When it became known that the old fox was dead, wooers presented themselves. The maid heard someone standing at the door knocking. She went and opened it, and it was a young fox who said, "What may you be about, Miss Cat? Do you sleep or do you wake?" She answered, "I am not sleeping, I am waking. Would you know what I am making? I am boiling warm beer with butter so nice. Will the gentleman enter and drink some likewise?" "No, thank you, miss," said the fox. "What is Mrs. Fox doing?" The maid replied, "She sits all alone and makes her moan, weeping her little eyes quite red, because old Mr. Fox is dead." "Do just tell her, miss, that a young fox is here who would like to woo her." "Certainly, young sir." The cat goes up the stairs, trip trap. The door she knocks at, tap tap tap. "Mistress Fox, are you inside?" "Oh yes, my little cat," she cried. "A wooer he stands at the door out there. Tell me what he is like, my dear." "But has he 9 tails, as beautiful as the late Mr. Fox?" "Oh no," answered the cat, "he has only 1. "Then I will not have him." Miss Cat went downstairs and sent the wooer away. Soon afterwards there was another knock, and another fox was at the door who wished to woo Mrs. Fox. He had 2 tails, but he did not fare better than the first. After this still more came, each with one tail more than the other, but they were all turned away, until at last one came who had 9 tails like old Mr. Fox. When the widow heard that, she said joyfully to the cat, "Now open the gates and doors all wide, and carry old Mr. Fox outside." But just as the wedding was going to be solemnized, old Mr. Fox stirred under the bench and cudgelled all the rabble and drove them and Mrs. Fox out of the house. Second story. When old Mr. Fox was dead, the wolf came as a wooer and knocked at the door, and the cat, who was servant to Mrs. Fox, opened it for him. The wolf greeted her and said, "Good day, Mrs. Cat of Keeruit. How comes it that alone you sit? What are you making that's good?" The cat replied, "In milk I'm breaking bread so sweet. Will the gentleman please come in and eat?" "No, thank you, Mrs. Cat," answered the wolf. "Is Mrs. Fox not at home?" The cat said, "She sits upstairs in her room, bewailing her sorrowful doom, bewailing her trouble so sore, for old Mr. Fox is no more." The wolf answered, "If she's in want of a husband now, then will it please her to step below?" The cat runs quickly up the stair and lets her tail fly here and there until she comes to the parlour door. With her 5 gold rings at the door she knocks. "Are you within, good Mistress Fox? If you're in want of a husband now, then will it please you to step below?" Mrs. Fox asked, "Has the gentleman red stockings on, and has he a pointed mouth?" "No," answered the cat. "Then he won't do for me." When the wolf was gone, came a dog, a stag, a hare, a bear, a lion, and all the beasts of the forest, one after the other. But one of the good points which old Mr. Fox had possessed was always lacking, and the cat had continually to send the wooers away. At length came a young fox. Then Mrs. Fox said, "Has the gentleman red stockings on, and has he a little pointed mouth?" "Yes," said the cat, "he has." "Then let him come upstairs," said Mrs. Fox, and ordered the servant to prepare the wedding feast. Sweep me the room as clean as you can, up with the window fling out my old man. For many a fine fat mouse he brought, yet of his wife he never thought, but ate up every one he caught. Then the wedding was solemnized with young Mr. Fox, and there was much rejoicing and dancing, and if they have not left off, they are dancing still. So that was the first story. Now we're on to story 39, which is called The Elves, and it says underneath, first story. A shoemaker, by no fault of his own, had become so poor that at last he had nothing left but leather for one pair of shoes. So in the evening he cut out the shoes which he wished to begin to make the next morning, and as he had a good conscience, he lay down quietly in his bed, commended himself to God, and fell asleep. In the morning, after he had said his prayers and was just going to sit down to work, the two shoes stood quite finished on his table. He was astounded and knew not what to say to it. He took the shoes in his hands to observe them closer, and they were so neatly made that there was not one bad stitch in them, just as if they were intended as a masterpiece. Soon after, a buyer came in, and as the shoes pleased him so well, he paid more for them than was customary, and with the money the shoemaker was able to purchase leather for 2 pairs of shoes. He cut them out at night, and next morning was about to set to work with fresh courage, but he had no need to do so, for, when he got up, they were already made, and they found buyers who gave him money enough to buy leather for 4 pairs of shoes. The following morning, too, he found the 4 pairs made, and so it went on constantly. When he cut out in the evening was finished by the morning, so that he soon had his honest independence again, and at last became a wealthy man. Now it happened that one evening, not long before Christmas, when the man had been cutting out, he said to his wife before going to bed, "What do you think of staying up tonight to see who it is that lends us this helping hand?" The woman liked the idea and lighted a candle, and then they hid themselves in a corner of the room behind some clothes which were hanging up there, and watched. When it was midnight, 2 pretty little naked men came, sat down by the shoemaker's table, took all the work which was cut out before them, and began to stitch and sew and hammer so skilfully and so quickly with their little fingers that the shoemaker could not turn away his eyes for astonishment. They did not stop until all was done and stood finished on the table, and they ran quickly away. Next morning the woman said, "The little men have made us rich, and we really must show that we are grateful for it. They run about so and have nothing on and must be cold. I'll tell you what I'll do. I will make them little shirts and coats and vests and trousers, and knit both of them a pair of stockings, and you too make them 2 little pairs of shoes." The man said, "I shall be very glad to do it." And one night, when everything was ready, they laid their presents all together on the table instead of the cut-out leather, and then concealed themselves to see how the little men would behave. At midnight they came bounding in and wanted to get to work at once, but as they did not find any leather cut out, but only the pretty little articles of clothing, they were at first astonished, and then they showed intense delight. They dressed themselves rapidity, putting the pretty clothes on and singing, "Now we are boys so fine to see, we should no longer cobblers be." Then they danced and skipped and leapt over chairs and benches. At last they danced out the door. From that time forth they came no more, but as long as the shoemaker lived, all went well with him, and all his undertakings prospered. Second story. There was once a poor servant girl who was industrious and cleanly, and swept the house every day and emptied her sweepings on the great heap in front of the door. One morning, when she was just going back to her work, she found a letter on this heap, and as she could not read, she put her broom in the corner and took the letter to her master and mistress. It was an invitation from the Elves, who asked the girl to hold a child for them at its christening and be its godmother. The girl did not know what to do, but at length, after much persuasion, and as they told her that it was not right to refuse an invitation of this kind, she consented. Then 3 elves came and led her to a hollow mountain, where the little folks lived. Everything there was small, but more elegant and beautiful than can be described. The baby's mother lay in a bed of black ebony, ornamented with pearls. The coverlids were embroidered with gold, the cradle was of ivory, and the bath of gold. The girl stood as godmother, and then wanted to go home again, but the little elves begged her to stay 3 days with them. So she stayed and passed the time in pleasure and gaiety, and the little folks did all they could to make her happy. At last she set out on her way home, after they filled her pockets quite full of money and led her out of the mountain again. When she got home she wanted to begin her work, and took the broom, which was still standing in the corner, in her hand and began to sweep. Then some strangers came out of the house, who asked her who she was and what business she had there, and she had not, as she thought, been gone 3 days with the little men in the mountains, but 7 years, and in the meantime her former masters had died. Third story. A certain mother's child had been taken away out of its cradle by the elves, and a changeling with a large head and staring eyes, which would do nothing but eat and drink, laid in its place. In her trouble she went to her neighbour and asked her advice. The neighbour said that she was to carry the changeling into the kitchen, set it down on the hearth, light a fire, and boil some water in 2 eggshells, which would make the changeling laugh, and if he laughed that would be the end of him. The woman did everything that her neighbour bade her. When she put the eggshells with water on the fire, the imp said, "I am as old now as the Wester Forest, but never yet have I seen anyone boil anything in an eggshell," and he began to laugh at it. While he was laughing, suddenly came a host of little elves, who brought the right child, set it down on the hearth, and took the changeling away with them. How peculiar. Okay, the third story for today is story 30, and it is the Robber Bridegroom. There was once on a time a miller who had a beautiful daughter, and as she grew up he wished that she was provided for and well married. He thought, if any good suitor comes and asks for her, I will give her to him. Not long afterwards a suitor came who appeared to be very rich, and as the miller had no fault to find with him, he promised his daughter to him. The maiden, however, did not like him quite so much as a girl should like the man to whom she is engaged, and had no confidence in him. Whenever she saw or thought of him, she felt a secret horror. Once he said to her, "You are my betrothed, and yet you have never once paid me a visit." The maiden replied, "I know not where your house is." Then said the bridegroom, "My house is out there in the dark forest." She tried to excuse herself and said she could not find the way there. The bridegroom said, "Next Sunday you must come out there to me. I have already invited the guests, and I will strew ashes so that you may find your way through the forest." When Sunday came and the maiden had to set out on her way, she became very uneasy. She herself knew not exactly why, and to mark her way she filled both her pockets full of peas and lentils. Ashes were strewn at the entrance of the forest, and these she followed, but at every step she threw a couple of peas on the ground. She walked almost the whole day until she reached the middle of the forest, where it was the darkest, and there stood a solitary house which she did not like, for it looked so dark and dismal. She went inside it, but no one was within, and the most absolute stillness reigned. Suddenly a voice cried, turn back, young maiden dear, 'tis a murderer's house you enter here." The maiden looked up and saw that the voice came from a bird which was hanging in a cage on the wall. Again it cried, turn back, young maiden dear, 'tis a murderer's house you enter here." Then the young maiden went on further from one room to another, and walked through the whole house, but it was entirely empty, and not one human being was to be found. At last she came to the cellar, and there sat an extremely aged woman, whose head shook constantly. "Can you not tell me," said the maiden, "if my betrothed lives here?" "Alas, poor child," replied the old woman, "do you know—" Sorry guys, I was interrupted again. Oh my goodness gracious, my mum turned up to spend the afternoon with me, so I'm going to quickly finish these stories and then I'm going to go and spend time with my mum. It was not expected, and I do apologise that both the storytellings have been interrupted. Okay, so at last she came to the cellar, and there sat an extremely aged woman whose head shook constantly. "Can you not tell me," said the maiden, "if my betrothed lives here?" "Alas, poor child," replied the old woman, "do you know where you have come? You are in a murderer's den. You think you are a bride soon to be married, but you will wed death at your wedding. Look, I have been forced to put a great kettle on there with water in it, and when they have you in their power they will cut you to pieces without mercy, will cook you and eat you, for they are eaters of human flesh. If I do not have compassion on you and save you, you are lost." Thereupon the old woman led her behind a great barrel, where she could not be seen. "Be as still as a mouse," said she. "Do not make a sound or move, or all will be over for you. At night, when the robbers are asleep, we will escape, I have long waited for an opportunity. Hardly was this done than the godless crew came home. They dragged with them another young girl. They were drunk and paid no heed to her screams and lamentations. They gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, 1 glass of white wine, 1 glass of red, and a glass of yellow, and with this her heart burst in two. Thereupon they tore off her delicate raiment, laid her on a table, cut her beautiful body in pieces, and strewed salt on it. The poor bride behind the cask trembled and shook, for she saw right well what fate the robbers had destined for her. One of them noticed a gold ring on the little finger of the murdered girl, and as it would not come off at once, he took an axe and cut the finger off, but it sprang up in the air, away over the cask, and fell straight into the bride's bosom. The robber took a candle and wanted to look for it, but could not find it. Then another of them said, "Have you looked behind the great barrel?" But the old woman cried, "Come and get something to eat, and leave off looking till the morning. The finger won't run away from you." Then the robbers said, "The old woman is right," and gave up their search and sat down to eat. And the old woman poured a sleeping potion in their wine, so that they soon lay down in the cellar and slept and snored. When the bride heard that, she came out from behind the barrel and had to step over the sleepers, for they lay in rows on the ground, and great was her terror lest she should awaken one of them. But God helped her, and she got safely over. The old woman went up with her, opened the doors, and they hurried out of the murderer's den with all the speed in their power. The wind had blown away the strewn ashes, but the peas and lentils had sprouted and grown up, and showed them the way in the moonlight. They walked the whole night, until in the morning they arrived at the mill, and then the maiden told her father everything exactly as it had happened. When the day came when the wedding was to be celebrated, the bridegroom appeared, and the miller had invited all his relations and friends. As they sat at table, each was bidden to relate a story. The bride sat still and said nothing. Then said the bridegroom to the bride, "Come, my darling, do you know nothing? Relate something to us like the rest." She replied, "Then I will relate a dream. I was walking alone through a wood, and at last I came to a house in which no living soul was, but on the wall there was a bird in a cage which cried, 'Turn back, young maiden dear, 'tis a murderer's house you enter here.' And as this it cried once more, 'My darling, it was only a dream.' Then I went through all the rooms, and they were all empty, and there was something so horrible about them. At last I went down into the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman whose head shook. I asked her, 'Does my bridegroom live in this house?' She answered, 'Alas, poor child, you have got into a murderer's den. Your bridegroom does live here, but he will hew you in pieces and kill you, and then he will cook you and eat you.' My darling, it was only a dream. But the old woman hid me behind a great barrel, and scarcely was I hidden when the robbers came home, dragging a maiden with them, to whom they gave 3 kinds of wine to drink, white, red, and yellow, with which her heart broke in two. My darling, it was only a dream. Thereupon they pulled off her pretty clothes and hewed her fair body in pieces on a table and sprinkled them with salt. My darling, it was only a dream. And one of the robbers saw that there was still a ring on her little finger, and as it was hard to draw off, he took an axe and cut it off, but the finger sprang up in the air and sprang behind the great barrel and fell in my bosom. And there is the finger with the ring." And with these words she drew it forth and showed it to those present. The robber, who had, during this story, become as pale as ashes, leapt up and wanted to escape, but the guests held him fast and delivered him over to justice. Then he and his whole troop were executed for their infamous deeds. So he got his comeuppance then. And the last story for today is story number 41, called Mr. Korbes. There was once a cock and a hen who wanted to take a journey together. So the cock built a beautiful carriage which had 4 red wheels and harnessed 4 mice to it. The hen seated herself in it with the cock, and they drove away together. Not long afterwards they met a cat who said, "Where are you going?" The cock replied, "We are going to the house of Mr. Korbes." "Take me with you," said the cat. The cock answered, "Most willingly. Get up behind, lest you fall off in front. Take great care not to dirty my little red wheels, and you little wheels roll on, and you little mice pipe out as we go forth on our way to the house of Mr. Korbes." After this came a millstone, then an egg, then a duck, then a pin, and at last a needle, who all seated themselves in the carriage and drove with them. When, however, they reached the house of Mr. Korbes was not there. The mice drew the carriage into the barn, the hen flew with the cock upon a perch, the cat sat down by the hearth, the duck on the sink. The egg rolled itself into a towel, the pin stuck itself into the chair cushion, the needle jumped onto the bed in the middle of the pillow, and the millstone laid itself over the door. Then Mr. Korbes came home, went to the hearth, and was about to light the fire when the cat threw a quantity of ashes in his face. He ran into the kitchen in a great hurry to wash it off, and the duck splashed some water in his face. He wanted to dry it with the towel, but the egg rolled up against him, broke, and glued up his eyes. He wanted to rest and sat down in the chair, and then the pin pricked him. He fell in a passion and threw himself on his bed, but as soon as he laid his head on the pillow, the needle pricked him, so that he screamed aloud and was just going to run out into the wide world in his rage, but when he came to the door, the millstone leapt down and struck him dead. Mr. Korbes must have been a very wicked man. And that's the end of the story, folks. So we are going to leave it there for today. I will, of course, be back next weekend to read you some more stories from this book. And just looking ahead, they seem fairly short stories again for the most part. So yes, lots more to look forward to next week. I hope you enjoy this book. I love reading to you, even if I don't always understand what I'm reading. But it's great to spend this time with you, and I appreciate you coming by and watching. So please do enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I will see you again very, very soon. And until then, stay safe, be kind, look after one another, get some good quality time in with your loved ones, and get some good quality crafty time in. And I will see you in the next one or around the YouTube streets. I'm off to spend some time with my mum. Love you guys.